The new Indivisible guide that's going to be launching is, I'm sure you are not surprised to know, entitled A Practical Guide to Fixing Our Democracy, because as you've been hearing us say for a long time, that is what we are about. That is our number one priority, is fixing our democracy and making sure that we have a stable, durable, functional, healthy democracy that actually meets the needs and is representative of all its people for the first time. Go to the next slide. Okay, so some of the top lines from the guide that you're going to see. We've done it. We've defeated Trump. We've defeated his cronies. We won in Georgia and took the Senate. So now it's time for us to defeat the forces that allowed him to rise in the first place and that continue to threaten our democracy. And that has never been more clear than the events that played out yesterday. We know that trifectas are rare and fleeting. And so our only chance of stopping them is to use this really precious window of time to save our democracy. And if we don't use this democratic trifecta now, we might not get another chance. That's the reality. So what are we going to do? We can go to the next slide. Again, I don't think any of this is going to be a surprise to folks who are on this call. The first, this slide is what are the first giant steps, but this is like a whole plan in and of itself that we're really excited to dig into you all with starting tonight. And if I'm being honest, like stretching back in time, you all have been on this journey with us for a while. So number one, absolutely top of the agenda is to unrig the game, structural democracy reform. So this includes HR 1, which has voting rights and anti-corruption and campaign finance reform pieces, in addition to DC statehood. I've seen folks shouting out DC statehood in the chat already. And we know that that's a really key component of what has to be part of a comprehensive democracy reform package, is enfranchising the 700,000 people who currently do not have representation. Who live in DC. And then also making progress on court reforms, which includes court expansion, understanding that the Senate and the court are both major institutions that have been rigged. And if we're serious about saving our democracy, addressing the structural deficiencies in both of those institutions is key. So that's one, structural democracy reform. And the second is bold and inclusive economic recovery. So this is the kind of follow-up pandemic response. Despite the legislation that passed at the end of this past year, we know that there's still pent-up demand for relief. There's still a raging pandemic, and we need to reject austerity politics, right? We know, all of us know, that there is a call to invest in the well-being of our people, and that's a choice that we can make. And the lies that Republicans are telling about how we can't actually afford to meet the needs of people, to pull ourselves out of this economic recovery, to respond to the pandemic, those are lies and deserve to be rejected. So a bold and inclusive economic recovery that takes steps towards addressing racial injustice, wealth inequality, and begins to decarbonize our economy. And then the third piece of this is to wield power. So the shorthand that we're using to talk about this is that we want to make it good. We want to make sure that legislation is as strong and progressive as possible, using the newly formed progressive voting bloc in the House, which we're so excited to be working with the Congressional Progressive Caucus to wield in this new Congress, and then get it through, which is going to require eliminating the filibuster in the Senate. We are clear, and you've heard us talk about for a long time, that there's absolutely no reason that we should be giving Mitch McConnell veto authority over our agenda in this next year, after we and all of you and so many folks around the country worked their behinds off to win a trifecta. We're not handing the reins over to Mitch McConnell. And so getting rid of the filibuster is a key part of that. Next slide. So I want to take a second to be really real with you all, because you're going to hear a lot of talk about fake strategy. You're going to hear a lot of conversations about, quote, healing the divisiveness of the Trump administration by reaching across the aisle and finding ways to bipartisan compromise. And I want to be so clear that none of us can fall for that. There is not a good faith offer of bipartisanship available to us. We have seen the way that Republicans have acted, not just for the past 4 years, but before that. And we know that any offer of bipartisan compromise is really an attempt to stall, slow down, waste time, waste political capital, get Democrats to water down their own political ambitions. And we don't have time for that. We have a trifecta, we have to wield it, and we have an ambitious agenda. And so we need to be really clear-eyed about what is on offer and what is not. And so when you hear this desire to heal the divisiveness of the Trump administration by compromising all of our values, I want to encourage you to not fall for it. Affirm the emotional drive for repair and healing. That's real. We are all holding on to that, but then redirect folks you're talking to the need to transform harmful systems and a path forward together. You can go to the next slide. So here's real strategy. This is spread across a couple of slides. When our team was working on, if for those of you who joined the call right after the election in November, where we rolled out the interim guide, the showing 2020 the door, because we were all done with that year, we talked about this a little bit. But our team went back and looked at what happened under the Obama administration to glean some lessons that we could learn from that experience. And this is what we pulled out. And the evidence for this is really breathtaking, y'all. But here's the summary. We can expect Republicans to obstruct, delay, and engage in bad faith BS. We have to prepare to counter a right-wing extremist backlash. We will expect congressional Democrats to get cold feet. I've seen a little bit of chatter about that in the chat. That's real, we know it. But part of our job, right, is to counter those cold feet with some heat that we're going to bring to motivate them into action, and that we have to go big, go fast, and get it right, because we know that our window before we're in the next electoral cycle is pretty short. On that piece about countering right-wing extremist backlash, I just want to take a second to sit there, partly because of what happened yesterday, partly because Indivisible was birthed out of some of the lessons learned from the Tea Party movement, and part of because we're going to build this together, all of us here on this call. And so I want us to sort of take a second to wrestle with this hard truth. This is a snippet from the guide. I'm just going to read it out to you for a second. The hard truth is that we'll need to brace for something far worse than the Tea Party, because armed white supremacists have been further emboldened and organized under Trumpism and have vowed to be ungovernable. These white supremacist forces will be a prominent feature of our political landscape in the months ahead. It will be our job together to build a political and organizing strategy that takes them into account and wins anyway. Our side has to disarm their political pressure with our own bigger and braver grassroots movement, and make sure that Biden's agenda isn't blocked or severely weakened the way that Obama's was. And that's where all of you come in. So I know you'll all go back and read the whole Indivisible guide, but I wanted to pull just that piece out in acknowledging the reality of what we're up against, but also the tremendous opportunity that we have to win big wins, and the work that we have to do together to counter that backlash and win anyway, as the guide says. Okay, next slide. So here's strategy. We want to govern, not destroy, and that's way harder. As it turns out, it is way easier to just burn everything down and consolidate power and money in the hands of a few rich white folks. It is way harder to govern and build a healthy, functional, sustainable democracy. There's a lot more detail in the guide. I'm really excited for you all to dig into it and see what's there. But I do want to talk about some of our top targets. So, right, we have President Biden, we have Pelosi as the leader in the House, and Schumer as the leader in the Senate. And we have a little bit of a different strategy for each of them. For Biden, those of you who joined us for the Showing 2020 the Door guide, that conversation, have heard this already, that we believe the best guide for you, the best way for you as constituents to influence President Biden is actually to go through your member of Congress. I know that's counterintuitive because it's indirect to go from you as a constituent to your member of Congress to President Biden. But the reality is that because there's so many people in our country, the president is responsive to all of them in a certain way. And so your influence is extremely diluted. But your influence with your individual member of Congress is quite concentrated. And so concentrated power directed at your member of Congress, and then organizing those members of Congress together, all of us across the Indivisible movement with our progressive partners, to then pressure President Biden and his administration, is going to be our most effective way to collectivize the power that we have. With Pelosi, we're going to be wielding the progressive voting bloc to force legislation to be as good and progressive as possible as it's moving through the House. And with Schumer, because of that 50-50 split, we know that the vote there is going to be really tight. And so we're mostly going to be looking for good things to move in the House first, and then pressuring the Senate to move them without messing with them, is mostly the pathway that we're going to be going. And one other piece to remember is that in this new moment, in this governing moment where Democrats actually have total control over the agenda across the different levers of the federal government, our best impact is before the thing is baked. So for the first time, you're not just going to be calling to say vote yes or vote no when something is already on the floor. We're going to have opportunities to help shape bills as they're being written, as they're moving through committee, and shape them to be progressive and to meet our values on the front end. Next slide. Okay, this is the last thing I'll say. So what do we do? As it turns out, you're already super experts at pretty much everything you need to do, because many of the tactics that we're going to be talking about are the same things that you have been doing expertly and tirelessly and bravely for the last 4 years. But we'll get to do them with more ambition and more opportunity, which is really exciting. So we're still going to be calling on you to target your representative and your senators. But this time, you'll get to, again, pressure your member of Congress to pressure President Biden, improve legislation through the progressive voting bloc, influence what is drafted in committees, plus telling them how to vote on the floor like you've always been doing. So please check out the guide. I hope you'll engage with it, dig in, tell us what you think about it. And we really look forward to building the strategy with all of you together.